Hello, everyone. I wanted to give a brief overview, sort of a review, if you will, of Chapter 2, give you some of my insights and thoughts on some of the points they're making in this chapter, as well as get your opinions on a few things. Put some questions for you throughout the video. Hopefully you'll find those entertaining or at least helpful. It's always good to reflect on the reading. Uh, and they start off here. One of my favorite topics is what writing is and what it is not. There's a lot of myths about writing. Yeah, even people that have been doing it for years and really ought to know better, they still embrace a lot of false information about the writing process and how it works or how it should work. A lot of, as a student, you might have fallen for some of these. Like the idea that people are either born with writing talent or they don't have this talent, right? And so one of the most common ones. They're just all over the place, and I think these authors do a pretty good job of summing them up. Just to talk about a couple of these that I've seen students suffering from. One is the first one here is very apt. This idea that when you write, you have to start with brainstorming, and then you do your research, and then you do your outline, drafting. It's a very sort of boom, boom, one sort of connect the dots procedure. Really, though, that's very seldom the case, at least in the business context. You might research a while, write a while, edit some, let somebody look at it, come back, work on the introduction, do some more research. I mean, it's a very dynamic process. So that's one thing that you need to get used to. Now, what else do we have there? Many revisions. This is another big factor. A lot of students, and I think this is because we're kind of conditioned to, you write the essay, you submit the essay, you get graded, and then you never see it again. Whereas, of course, in the business world, you're going to see that document many, many, many times, and they're going to keep coming back to you sometimes repeatedly, asking you to update it or fix it or add something to it, take something out. Sometimes these documents can take years to get right. So you really have to get over this idea that you can't revise or that revision sucks or whatever. It was perfect. How dare you criticize my beautiful writing? You sort of have to cut that out and be willing to revise something to death, basically. It can be painful, I'm not going to lie, but it's just something we have to get used to. And you can't be offended by it. And these other ones here about it being a magical formula, mysterious process, all of this jazz. Hopefully we'll be able to dispel some of these myths throughout the class. Researching, I bet some of you might have been surprised by some of these, by this chapter, because really business research, technical writing, the sort of research you do for that, you can actually break a lot of the rules you might have picked up from academic research. And it's not that they're completely different, academic research and business research, let's say, but it's very different. For example, it could be interviews. Could be one of my favorites is just picking up a phone and calling a company and talking to somebody there, calling somebody in another department and just asking them for an answer to your question can be a lot faster than trying to figure it out by going to the library or Googling it even, or, going through a manual, whatever it is. So just remember, there's nothing wrong with picking up a phone and calling people. Sometimes it can save you a lot of time. And I know a lot of students are resistant to that. They'd rather text or email. But the truth is, it can save a lot of time sometimes just to call. Let's see what else we have there. Attending conferences. That's something you probably have. Maybe you've gone to an academic conference before or a business convention. Things of that sort. Very common in the business world. They'll send a bunch of people to a nice hotel. You go hear some speeches and you mingle. You get to know other professionals. You can learn a lot that way. Collaboration, another big thing is, I'm going to be talking about this when we get to the collaboration chapter. But in the business world, it's very rare that you're just going to be working on the document all by yourself. Most of the time, you'll have other people involved. And those other people might have different levels of expertise, and you need to learn how to leverage that. Surveys, another very common thing in business. And of course, reading books and magazines and websites, all great ways to do your research. And now moving into the planning process, again, I'm going to assume that you've covered a lot of this in 191, so or your freshman comp class. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it here, but I will say if you have any questions about this, I can certainly refer you to some videos from my 191 class where we talk about this stuff extensively. I'll just briefly go over these techniques here. But basically, all of these are good for writer's block. If you don't know how to start a document, or you're getting sort of bogged down, or you're sort of your thoughts are everywhere, and you're like, "Oh my God, I don't know what am I doing." Come back to these strategies, and they'll help you out. They'll get you out of that hole sometimes. So this one is the clustering, and you can see that it's sort of like bubbles. Kind of reminds me of those comic book bubbles they have when people talk. But you notice there's little lines that connect them, and it's just kind of a way to get the sort of words out of your mind, get them onto a sheet of paper, and then you can start sort of playing with these bubbles, drawing the lines, and somehow sometimes it can sort of free up your mind. You get sort of congested mentally, and just seeing it laid out like this can be really helpful sometimes. So it really works. Some people, they don't get any benefit from this. Other people, this is a lifesaver. So I say just try it out for yourself, see if it works. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll move on to the second one here, brainstorming. So with this, you're just, you might have a topic, could be, I don't know, thinking about the dangers of forest fires, let's say. Just pick something out of nowhere. So maybe you know a lot about this topic already. Maybe you don't know anything, but you don't, just to brainstorm, you don't really need to know anything. You just say, well, okay, forest fire, burning down, losing houses, damage to the environment, what else? Smoke damage, just stuff coming to mind, just thinking about the topic, right? And you can sort of, just write these out a little bit more so you get a list of thoughts, and then maybe that will be the spur you need to take it to the next level. So again, a useful exercise. Now this one here's my favorite, is the outlining. You notice here they say outline after revision. So if you don't know what an outline is, you've probably seen them before. You're looking at one right now. I know you've seen one of these. And some people get fussy with like the Roman numerals and the letters, and that doesn't really matter. The value of this is really being able to break things down into subheadings and subsections, and then start thinking about the content you want in each section, how it makes sense to put this information together. And a really good example here you can look at, sometimes you can do this before as a planning phase. This is the way I use outlines when I write a book chapter. I start with an outline, just thinking about sections I want in that book. So we did one about video game consoles, and we thought, well, okay, one section will be just the sort of history of the console. Next one would be the best games for the console. Then we might have one about collecting the console. Just whatever you want in your book, it's up to you, right? But having this outline as a way to work, something to work from, makes it a lot easier than just going in with a blank sheet and trying to start at the beginning. Okay, so that's all about the planning phases, and I wanted to stop here and just ask you, have you ever had writer's block? And if you have, what'd you do about it? Did you use one of these planning strategies? Do you think these are helpful? Maybe you've got your own strategy. I'd like to know about it, but what do you do to overcome your writer's block? Okay, moving forward here, they talk a little bit about the drafting phase, and a couple slides about this. And again, it's not something I want to spend a lot of time on, other than to say, students can get hung up here because they don't think of themselves as drafting. They think of themselves as writing the final draft, even though they're just starting out. So I used to work in a computer lab when I was an undergrad, and students would come in there all the time working on papers, and there'd always be the student that would just be looking at a blank screen. And he or she would write a little bit. I don't like that. They delete it. Go back, and after a while to go over there, I kind of feel sorry for them, right? So let's seem to be having some trouble here. What's going on? And say, I just can't get this first sentence the way I want it. And maybe they spent like an hour there working on this first sentence. So I'd always say, well, it doesn't matter. Just write anything. write a horrible, terrible sentence and just move on to the next one after that, because you can always go back and change it later, right? So just don't be so striving for perfection from the get-go. I think about it more as just write whatever garbage, even if it's complete garbage, just get something on the page, because you can always delete it, fix it later, edit it, whatever. The key is not to let yourself just get stuck and sort of like that wheel stuck in the tire in the snow, just going around and around and around again, right? So this, if you think about yourself as just drafting, it's a lot easier. And also remember, as you're drafting, don't get too attached to anything. Don't get married to it, as it were. Keep in mind, it's just a draft. You might delete the whole thing. That's sometimes I've written a whole chapter, whole essay sometimes, and just threw it out. Didn't like it, but I learned something by writing it. So when I wrote it the second time, it was a lot easier, because even though I threw out the copy, I learned by doing it the first time. I had some practice with it, so the second time was easier. Nothing wrong with that. Now here's some other tips. Write the easy part first. Sometimes you just don't feel like working on a part of a document. Maybe that introduction is just too intimidating right now. Topic sentence, thesis statement, whatever. Too hard right now, so start at the end. Sometimes you think about the conclusion, where do you want to end up in the chapter? Start there, and then work your way back. You can imagine writing a murder mystery novel and starting with or ending with the line, the butler did it, and then you can work backwards from there, all the way back to the whole mystery, starting backwards. That could be kind of fun. But anyway, whatever is easier at the moment. Not worrying, again, not about the grammar at this point. Outside opinions, great strategy, especially if you get stuck. Sometimes we're the worst critics, and you're looking at this. Is this good enough? Is it fine? I don't know how I feel about it. There's nothing wrong with getting some help. Here at St. Cloud State, we have a wonderful place called the Right Place. And there's tutors in there, they're Right Place consultants. And you could bring a document there, or you could just bring an outline, or just maybe you have no idea. You just come in with an assignment, writing prompt, whatever it is. Just sometimes just talking to somebody about it, you'll realize, hey, okay, I got this. And you start to feel more confident just by talking to somebody. So I highly recommend it. And then finally, the revising part of it. And a lot of writers say this is really the most important part of writing. So you've drafted something, and revising is you're going back in there and you're thinking, how can I make this better in some way? Can I look at it from a different pair of eyes, re-see it in a different way? This could be, I bet you've probably had this experience where you have written an essay, and then maybe some months later, years later, for whatever reason, you look at it again, you find it maybe in your desk, and you look at that thing and you go, whoa, oh, this is painful, it's bad, I can't believe I wrote this, I'm such a horrible writer, And this is because of this revising, because some time has gone past and you've learned some new things, right? Now you're seeing it differently than when you wrote it. So you don't want to get too carried away with this. It can be kind of silly about it, right? But it is true. If you come back to a document a couple days later, a lot of times you'll see things you didn't see before, and you can fix them. So this is why I love this rough draft. Make the rough draft earlier than the papers do. So then you have a chance to let it sit for a while, so you can sort of let the dust settle, and then when you go back in and do your final draft, you'll be re-seeing it again. So very useful. And they talk here just about some different ways to revise content, organization, and tone. And you can see the effect here. I'm not going to read this to you. You've already read it in your textbook, but don't even look at the text right now. Just look at the shape of it. So you notice a sort of big paragraph and a sort of little clump at the end. I mean, it doesn't look very good. It just kind of looks messy to me. It just looks unorganized. I mean, compare it. So look at this one. Now look at this one. So we're going before and after. So before, just messy, couple of big clumps. Here, we've got nicer shaped paragraphs. We've got subheadings there. What is drag? How drag works. So you can, to me, this is so much better organized with these subheadings. You know exactly what is in each of these paragraphs just by looking at the subheading. You don't get confused by this. It's a good way to stay organized, help the reader along. So hopefully you like this version better. Okay, now we're into the editing, and they talk about this in terms of being fine-tuning a document, checking those sentences, checking punctuation, spelling, grammar, and usage, all this good stuff. It's sort of what I would call the little nitpicky stuff that nevertheless can really add up. And if you don't edit your documents, it's going to make you look sloppy, unprofessional. Me, I'm an English professor, been doing this, I guess, about 20 years now or so, and still, when I write something, I find all kinds of little mistakes in it, just stuff that I didn't see. Maybe it took weeks for me to finally see that I made all these mistakes. And so I always, even though I've been doing this all this time, I always take the time to edit, just go sentence by sentence, look for little pronouns, look for the sound-alike words. Here, like you're hearing something is H-E-A-R. Here, like right here, is H-E-R-E. So that's just one example from my writing. I tend to get those confused all the time. And so I have to go back in and make sure I didn't screw it up, right? And you're going to have your own little problems like that. I think every person sort of has his or her own little foibles, I suppose. But anyway, this is the part where you really want to focus in line by line. And there's just some general tips here. I'm sure you've heard these before. A lot of this is common sense. The needlessly complex sentences, sometimes this happens because you want to impress somebody. You don't want to just sound too simple. But just keep in mind, business writing, again, the person reading it, English might not be their first language. It might need to be translated. There's all kinds of good reasons to avoid the complexity. There's really just hardly ever a reason for it. So just keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it simple, keep it clear. The second one there about short, choppy sentences. I mean, if you got 4 or 5 sentences that are three words long, okay, that's getting choppy. You're starting to sound like a robot or something. So don't go to the extreme. Just go, again, just let common sense be your guide here. You're not writing to impress somebody with your vocabulary. You're just trying to get your message across. And all these other tips have to do with that. I'll be showing you a table here with some ways to cut. Now, cutting out unnecessary words, wordy phrases, concise phrases, all of this, I think English teachers, we actually have caused a lot of this trouble because we tell students, look, write about this topic, and it has to be 2,000 words. Okay. So you write everything you want to say about that topic in 500 words. Okay, that's nowhere, you're not even close to that word count. And so now you're like, okay, I got to put in some more stuff, and you're just making everything wordy. And you're trying to add stuff here. Just it doesn't need it. You're not adding any meaning to not adding anything useful. You're just sort of expanding this out, and it gets to be really just awful when you have to do this, right? So now, I'm sorry for for giving those kind of assignments, right? But now you want to think about not trying to be as wordy as possible to meet a word count, but actually the opposite. Trying to think of what can I cut? What can I just take for granted that the reader's going to already know? Maybe just little like phrases I can cut. Anything to get this down, because you might be dealing with somebody who has very little time to sit there and try to figure out what you're talking about. Maybe they've got memos and they're just trying to get through these memos, and it's only 8 hours in the day, right? So you need to get the information they need and quickly and clearly. That's the goal. Otherwise, you're wasting time and ultimately wasting the company money with all this wordy stuff. So it's not just style for its own sake. It actually serves a purpose. And so we look here at some of these wordy phrases that people use all the time. You can look at this list. Committed to, maybe you get a little tattoo of this table here if you want. But some of the ones I see all the time, due to the fact that that just means because, And you could change all the due to the fact that's into because, and look at that. You save what, 3 words or 4 words with that, and that's just one of the ones on this list. So uh, now don't take this the wrong way and think, well, you can never say it. Of course you can, but it's just if you're trying to be concise, you want to start considering, well, maybe I shouldn't use it this time. Maybe at least I shouldn't use it every time. Try to cut back a little bit, and your readers will appreciate it. So look at that. So I mean, if I gave you this if I sent you this email, you'd probably say, "Oh my God, I got to read this. what is Dr. Barton doing here, sending me this, all this information? Oh my God, I mean, am I right? I mean, you don't even want to read this. Just look at the shape of it. You already don't want to read it. Maybe it's important information, but you don't want to read it. Now consider this other one. So again, before and after, just look at the difference there. So this after version, it's not just that there's not as many words. I don't know what the word counts are here, but I can tell it's more it's better composed just by looking at those bullet points there. So we got the nice introductory paragraph. We got some nice bullet points. It's concise. I can look at those bullet points. I could read those more easily than I can trying to find the same information in this big old clump. So I'm sure I don't even have to ask you. I'm sure you like this version better. But even if you've been taught to like long paragraphs or whatever it is, try to retrain yourself into thinking about a business situation. We want a short, sweet, clearly organized, bulleted list. It's great stuff. Okay, so anyway, before we get into the sexism aspect of this, I'll stop again here, ask you what your thoughts are on these. Have you written, what have your teachers said about your writing? Has a teacher said that you're wordy? Has a teacher told you that you are using wordy phrases, or maybe that you're writing choppy sentences? Do you have repetition? I want you to think about your own sort of foibles. I told you mine with some of those words like here and here, and another one is R, A-R-E, and our, O-U-R. So I just want you to think for a minute about your own writing and what teachers have told you over the years, and what are those tips, and what could you do about it? Okay, so we're going to wrap up here with sexist language, and of course this is a huge problem for many people, and it's not just that, it's not like people want to be offensive or they're trying to be derogatory. I mean, some people are, but a lot of the times it's just not being aware of the issues involved and ways to be respectful is what it really comes down to. So they give you some nice lists in the book. There's common ones that they've got here: the chairperson instead of chairman. I'm sure you've heard about this from your other classes, but you don't want to use a word like chairman, policeman, fireman, firefighter, police officer, chairperson, or just the chair is much preferred. And in this business with the masculine pronouns, it's I mean, for many, many years, again, English teachers, including myself, if you wrote a sentence that said something like, the student should bring his book to class, you would say that's wrong, because if you put he or his, the student could be male or female, but you're just saying he, so you should write he or she there, or his or her there. So that was one error. But the other error, students would say, well, why can't we just say, well, the student should bring their book to class, and a lot of teachers would say, well, that's wrong, because there is a plural pronoun. You have to have more than one thing for it to be they, or them, or their. And if you just say the student, you're just talking about one student. So for many, many years, we would say the way out of this problem is just to say students, or all students, or to use the his or her business. But really, nowadays, it's much more common just to say it's fine. Just say their or they. It's fine. We're not going to mark it wrong or consider it incorrect, because it's really kind of clunky to use this his or her business. And we kind of ultimately decide what's correct and incorrect as a as the people speaking the language, right? So again, that's kind of going away. Just be, if you really want to be super correct, the he or his business, or the his or her business is I guess fine, but really the there is a more common. And even more recently, we have started to use gender neutral pronouns. And you might have seen some people on emails at the bottom will put a preferred pronoun, and maybe they say he, him, or his, or she, her, hers, but they might also use some of these newer ones like Z, and that's ZE or ZIE, or HIR, or HIRS, which is pronounced here. So there are some some updated pronouns that you might look into. But I don't know how updated your office is going to be or what kind of environment you'll be working in. So if you're not sure, again, follow these other tips. Ask somebody, ask a colleague, ask a manager, see if there's a style guide available. There's all kinds of ways to avoid being offensive. Let's see what else we have here. With this one, I never see anybody do this. Put et or s on something like stewardess. It seems like everybody knows better than that nowadays. They just say flight attendant. So, I never see it, so I'm just going to skip it. Sexist salutations. This one is when you're writing a letter and you don't know necessarily who's going to be reading the letter. There's a tendency to put dear sir, dear sirs. I still see that one occasionally. And of course, that's ridiculous because you don't know if it's a sir. It could be a woman, right? So you want to avoid that. I guess you could say dear sir or madam, or have dear ladies and gentlemen. That's starting to sound kind of strange. Usually, I guess most people would be fine with just Mr. MR or MS. You definitely don't want to get into the MRS business or MISS business, unless, I guess, if somebody tells you, look, please use MRS, or if that's what they use, then you would use it back to them. But anyway, I think the key here is just don't assume anything about gender. Don't indulge with the stereotype. Take a little time to figure it out. And the advice of if you're not sure, simply ask is a pretty good advice, right? Sometimes in a business class, I run into this. There's certain names where it's not clear. Tony. What's some other ones? Tyler. I was kind of surprised by this because Tyler to me always was male. I had a lot of male friends named Tyler, but now I'm seeing female students named Tyler spelled the same exact way. So again, you can't assume should it be Mr., should it be Miss? All I have is a name to work with. Well, I shouldn't assume. If I'm smart, I'm going to going to ask this person, or maybe just try to avoid using any kind of pronoun. All right, other types of stereotypical language, race, national origin stereotypes, and I think we do a good job here at St. Cloud State of educating students about all of these issues. So I won't rehash all of this here. I will say, if you do have questions, again, it's always better to ask than to risk being offensive or look ignorant by using something inappropriate. Right? It doesn't take 5 seconds to find out whether something is acceptable or not. And remember too, ask could be a colleague, a manager. Much better to have somebody look at something for 5 seconds and be told, oh, no, you need to change that. That's a lot easier to deal with than, oh my God, this is out now, and you're being sued, or you've inadvertently offended somebody you didn't want to. So again, it's just, this stuff changes often enough too, where even something that might have been acceptable back in the 90s, maybe it's no longer acceptable. So I can't just assume anything. We've got all kinds of issues here, like disability issues, ageism. For some reason, some people will be, very politically correct on maybe disabilities, but they'll still think it's okay to stereotype people based on age. I don't know why that is, but just try to drilled it into your mind that you don't want to be discriminatory against anybody for any reason. Sexual orientation. So we just talked about some alternative pronouns you might consider using. So again, this stuff changes all the time. You just have to try to stay on top of it. And main advice I would give is don't be afraid to ask. Okay, so some final thoughts about writing process. When focusing on the audience's needs, this should be self-evident, but a lot of times we get sort of off track. We start thinking, well, I want to show off my vocabulary instead of, will the audience understand these words I'm using? So always focus on that audience. The second one, pretty common sense. Of course, you want your information to be accurate. Even, sometimes I find people and they'll say, I just know this is right. Or, I heard this I heard this Dr. Oz say this. Or, my mom told me this and I know she's right. Maybe you're just so convinced it's correct, so you don't bother to check it. But really, you need to get in the habit of just checking it, always check it. There's a site called Snopes.com you might have heard of. And whenever you hear something, sometimes you see something on Facebook and you think, that sounds a little questionable, but maybe I should share it. No, don't share it. Type it into Snopes. See if it's correct or not. Maybe somebody just made that up and you look pretty silly sharing it. So just take a minute to verify it. 5 seconds can save you a lot of headache later. Let's see what else we have there. Making sure you've revised appropriately, conferred with people. Especially in a collaborative situation, we'll talk more about this later. But sometimes, if you're working on a document with a group, you don't want to submit that document for a grade unless the other people in the group have had a chance to look it over. So don't forget to do that. Proofreading, saving the final versions. A couple tips I'll throw out here for you. So when you're working on a document, you like to save it every now and then, right? Just make sure when you go to save, you do a save as, and you come up with a title for your document that you'll remember and be able to find it. So it could be, my resume draft. That's pretty clear what that is. And the reason I'm telling you this is that when you go to submit the file or attach the file, it'll be very clear what you want to submit. If you're one of those people that gets lazy and you just save everything as document or untitled number 2, well, then you might accidentally send the wrong document, and you look really stupid when you do that. So, and I've done it. This is why I'm telling you this. So just make sure that you save it as something you'll remember. And then finally, of course, make sure you actually attach the document. Sometimes you forget to attach it, and you look really silly again. You say, please see attached file, and there's no attachment. So Microsoft Word, or what is it other? OneLook, or I'm kind of blanking on the name of the I can't even remember the name of their Outlook. There we go. So Outlook will remind you. I think Gmail will remind you. If you use the word attachment, it'll say, hey, shouldn't there be something attached here? And that saved my butt a couple of times, but really I should just remember that myself. Some good advice is to attach it first before you start to write the email. That way you won't forget it for sure. That's some good advice I picked up along the way. All right, I think that'll do it. Again, if you have any questions about anything, experiences you'd like to share, I try to keep up to date. Maybe something's out of date here. You can let me know. I'd be happy to pass that information on. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time.